Welcome to a celebration of Nantucket Sound, our monthly webinar series to celebrate different aspects of the Sound. I'm your host, Audra Parker. I'm the president and CEO of the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound. And for those of you who don't know us, we're a nonprofit environmental organization based in Hyannis on Cape Cod. And our mission is the permanent protection and preservation of Nantucket Sound, the body of water that lies between Cape Cod and the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. And protection of this body of water is critical because of its unique situation. As you can see from this map, Nantucket Sound is split jurisdictionally between state waters and federal waters. The state waters run 3 miles from the shorelines of Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket, and are protected under a state law called the Massachusetts Ocean Sanctuaries Act. But the federal waters in the center are unprotected and vulnerable to industrial development. So to achieve our mission, we are seeking federal action, either administrative action or congressional action to designate Nantucket Sound, all of the waters of Nantucket Sound, as a National Historic Landmark. And a National Historic Landmark is the highest level of historic protection possible and leverages a 2010 decision by the U.S. Department of the Interior that designated Nantucket Sound as a traditional cultural property because of its significance to the Wampanoag tribes and, in fact, to tribes across the nation. So along with a strong and wide and diverse group of stakeholders, we are seeking both the administrative designation of Nantucket Sound as a historic landmark, as well as federal legislation. And the federal legislation would also ensure that other threats such as diminished water quality and degradation of habitat are addressed. And to support the protection and preservation of Nantucket Sound, we built a very large group of stakeholders. So we have support from all the towns on Nantucket Sound, from the Cape, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket, chambers of commerce, historic preservation groups, environmental organizations, and many others that understand that this very precious natural resource deserves permanent protection. So tonight, I am very pleased to welcome our guest, Theresa Mitchell, who will be discussing the history of Nantucket Sound. And just a few words about Theresa. She is an award-winning journalist and historian, the author of 8 books, including A History of Nantucket Sound, Cape Cod Bay, and the Pendleton Disaster off Cape Cod, which was the greatest small boat rescue in Coast Guard history. She's worked at several Cape Cod-based organizations to preserve open space, wildlife, and marine environments, and served as the executive director of the Orenda Wildlife Land Trust. She has also served, and this is a very impressive resume, served in NOAA's Advisory Council for Stellwagen Bank and was the founding director of the annual Cape Cod Maritime History Symposium at the Cape Cod Museum of Natural History. And finally, if that's not enough, she holds master's degrees in history from Eastern Washington University, environmental management from Yale, and professional writing from UMass Dartmouth. So thank you so much for joining us, Theresa, and I'm very excited to hear what you have to say this evening.
Thank you, Audra, and thank you for your many years of superior leadership in this effort. And your own resume is far above mine, and I've always been in awe of your work. And thank you to Sandy Taylor behind the scenes and Peter Aramo as well. And you have a wonderful team. So I'm just very pleased to be here. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And so logistics, video capacity is off, so you'll only see me and Theresa. I'm going to get off in just a second, and then I'll rejoin after Theresa finishes her presentation, and then we will take questions from the audience. And you can give your questions throughout the presentation, and I will be back at the end to facilitate a Q&A. So thank you so much, Theresa, and I will stop my video now. Okay, good luck.
Okay. Okay, good. We have some visuals coming up, and hello, everyone. And most of all, thank you for your time to be here with me this evening. I appreciate your time. It's a non-renewable resource, as they say, just like water. So I'm very, very pleased about that. Okay, so we're gonna get started now. And Waves of Wonder, a short history of Nantucket Sound. So I think we can move, Peter, to the next slide. Okay, so here's our roadmap. I'm not a believer in really long lectures, and I hope you're not either. I think they can go on and on and on, but I think we're going to begin with a little geology and geography, a couple of maps, wildlife, human activities, a couple of sea stories, and some wonderful pictures that tell their own story. So by definition, I've always wondered what a sound was. And so a little research from our good friends at Wikipedia, which is something historians are never supposed to use, but I do use it for some surface things. So it's an Old Norse word, which means swimming, which I think was very interesting. And by the numbers, the northern end of the shoal has a depth of 2 fathoms. A fathom is a line of maritime measurement. It's 6 feet each fathom, or 1.83 meters. And as you can read, Nantucket Shoals marked on its northern side by lighted buoys and forms part of the southern side of Great Round Shoal Channel. In other words, it's between 5 feet at its most shallow to 85 feet. And I have been out on a boat years ago with the Dennis Harbor Master. We were 3 miles out from shore, and I looked down. It was so shallow, I swear I was able to, well, I didn't get out of the boat, but I probably could have stood. The sand was right there on the bottom. So I think we can go to the next slide now. And some more vital statistics. It's 30 miles long, 25 miles wide. And as Audra brought up that beautiful map, which showed the outline perfectly, it runs from Woods Hole in Falmouth, south to Martha's Vineyard, east to Nantucket, north to Chatham, and it touches many of the towns on Cape, of course, Falmouth, Barnstable, Mashpee, Yarmouth, Dennis, Harwich, Chatham, and parts of Nantucket and the Vineyard. The Sound was critical to American shipping during the wooden boat era, and it remains a well-traveled highway. One historian, Barry Homer, told me years ago that, quote, sailing through the Sound was almost like threading a needle. And this was because of the ever-changing shallow depths and the strong currents, and gusts average 18 knots with a prevailing southwest wind. It's rarely calm on Nantucket Sound. So now we're looking at Nantucket, the larger Nantucket Shelf region. And that's composed, of course, of Nantucket Sound, and then Nantucket Shoals, the Great South Channel, and sea south of Martha's Vineyard. And this was once low hills and plains, this entire region, of course, before the glaciers, which changed everything 50 to 70,000 years ago. And Nantucket Sound, of course, was once a landmass, excuse me. All of southern New England rose at least 600 feet above what it is today, thanks to that glacier. Until about 9,500 years ago, Nantucket Sound was a lake. Sea level was 30 meters below its present level. And this is according to a Nantucket historian, Douglas Lithgow. And Nantucket Sound sits at the juncture where, can we go back to the slide we just left? Thanks, Peter. It goes back, it's at the juncture where the cold Labrador currents meet the warm Gulf Stream. And you can see that maybe a little to the left of the middle of that graphic. In fact, the shelf region measures about 5,000 square miles. And I once saw a documentary where scientists sampled the water and they found it was near pure. And the air itself was about as pure as the earth will allow these days. It was, I wish I could have been on that research vessel. And at the bottom of Nantucket Sound is crystalline basement rock. We can move one more slide. And it's the same as the entire North American continental plate. And this rock is covered by sedimentary rock, later consolidated. I'm reading, of course, what you're reading, excuse me, into solid rock by metamorphic processes. So that's what's below the surface. Let's get to the top and see what fun we can have. This is a map from 1849. It focuses on Nantucket, but reaches north into the Sound and a bit west and just outside the official boundary. The map was made by engineers and cartographers of the U.S. Coast Survey. And the survey was inaugurated by the 10th U.S. Congress in 1807 to measure or survey the American coastline to determine where hazards to shipping are located, and for the safety of mariners and to foster foreign commercial shipping traffic and the tariffs or taxes those ship captains would bring into port. And tariffs were the only way to build a brand new country, so this is really important. I could focus multiple lectures just on the Coast Survey because it's very much a passion of mine. But for our timeline, let me say that the survey was responsible for the uplifting of a young United States from a series of disconnected colonies to a global maritime powerhouse within 3 decades. The survey was connected to nearly every major national movement of the 19th century, including westward expansion, dealings with indigenous peoples, and the end of slavery and the end of the Civil War. The brightest scientific minds of the early to mid-19th century were found at the survey. If you were a scientist emigrating to America or born here, you wanted a job on the survey. And they spent a lot of time in Massachusetts waters, including the Sound. The longtime leader was Alexander Dallas Bache. He was a great-grandson of Ben Franklin. And today, the legacy of the Coast Survey is now known as NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They do a fine job of housing historical artifacts and papers from the legacy days of the survey. I could prattle on, but I will leave it there. And we'll move on to the next slide. This is one of my favorite maps. It's from 1892, and it shows the routes used by steamboats. The first steamboat, according to the Nantucket Enquirer, happened about 1830, the first steamship trip between Boston and Nantucket, aboard a vessel called the Chancellor Livingston, and it carried 300 passengers. The first New Bedford to Nantucket line was run on 1829. So the first operating company was the Nantucket Steamboat Company, and that later evolved into the Nantucket and Cape Cod Steamboat Company. In fact, between 1849 and 1949, no fewer than 10 other companies operated steamship service between Woods Hole and or some of Cape Cod, the Vineyard, and Nantucket. So what did this mean for culture and society? So how can we look at this through a purely historical lens? Regularly scheduled steamship travel afforded freedom of movement for humans, but this came at a cost. It also brought with it the responsibility to know what time it was, because usually in these days, it was largely agrarian. And so when the sun rose up, a farmer would awaken, or after breakfast, a shop would open. But now, especially with the advent of railroads and with steamships, people had to make sure they knew what time it was. And steamships revolutionized the way people use Nantucket Sound, both for pleasure and commercial gain, as many shipments and goods were conveyed across the seas. And so we'll move now to another slide. And this is obviously a contemporary slide, and this is courtesy of Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management. In fact, any state in the United States that touches water, even the Great Lakes or any marine environment, has a coastal zone management. And these offices came about in the 1970s. So here in Massachusetts, we have 5 state ocean sanctuaries. And don't be confused by Stellwagen Bank. That's not a state ocean sanctuary. There you go. Thank you. It is federal. It's about the size of Rhode Island, 804 square miles, extremely biodiverse. It's a wonderful area. And Massachusetts, as many know, has about 1,500 miles of coastline. And those are another map which shows, of course, the federal waters in the middle of Nantucket Sound that Audra was extremely articulate in describing what is happening there. Okay, so I could spend, oh my gosh, 2 or 3 lectures, but we're going to keep this one as it is, a Noah's Ark of biodiversity. And there are, of course, dozens of avian species and finfish and shellfish and whales. We could have, as I said, a separate lecture, but based on data from the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries, Nantucket Sound was and is a spawning ground and nursery for dozens of finfish, especially in the inlets which connect the freshwater to seawater. And the islands and Cape Cod shores lining Nantucket Sound provide a critical habitat for migratory, resting, breeding, and nesting areas for migratory birds and marine birds like roseate terns and petrels and shearwaters, to name a few. Nantucket Sound is a stop along the Atlantic Flyway. That's a global migratory route for birds, many of which are pelagic, meaning they live most of their lives at sea. Okay, so here we are. We are looking at a picture, late 19th century, of Holmes Hole, later known as Vineyard Haven. So we're going to talk a moment about Captain Henry and Mary Mantor. And they were, of course, living on the vineyard at the time. He was a sea captain. And I went to Martha's Vineyard some years ago to do some research on them. And their story is contained in one of my books. And you can see to the right, the reason I don't expect you to read that letter, but I wanted you to see how precise and beautiful the handwriting was. And some of the grammar isn't always great, but it is what it was back then. So the historian Henry Kittredge once remarked that Cape Cod was the greatest nursery of seamen in North America. And so from fishermen to merchant mariners to whaling, sea captains dominated global shipping throughout the late 18th to 19th centuries. And trust me, their stories could fill many, many lectures. So I'm going to focus right now on Henry Mantor of Vineyard Haven. He lived between 1816 and 1878, and he sacrificed time with family while away at sea earning a living. He received a letter from his wife Mary in 1844 while aboard the ship Pocahontas in the Indian Ocean. I won't read the entire letter because we'll be here quite a long time, but a short excerpt should serve as an example of sacrifice and loneliness many of these shipmasters and their families felt. I feel very lonely and lonesome, but then I think, this is the letter, I ought not to be when I consider that I am at home with my beloved parents and can enjoy the society of my friends, but you must try to keep up good spirits as possible. And that excerpt is from the letter that you're looking at. And a few months later, Captain Henry wrote to Mary to say, quote, "It is now Sunday eve, and I have been thinking of home the most of the day these days above all the rest causes me to think of you." He added, "I have not heard a profane word since I left home. I have a good ship and officers and crew, as far as I can discover so far, but it requires time to ascertain that fact." And I will say that it certainly, it was very salty to go to sea. A lot of language of the time, a lot of swearing, a lot of violence at times. Often the captain would not speak directly to a sailor. He'd give an order to the first mate, who would then send it down the chain, depending on the size of the ship. If it were a larger ship, of course, that was true. But a smaller ship, say a brig, which was almost a training ship for sailors, the captains would often engage directly with the sailors. But that's a separate lecture. But certainly Nantucket Sound was a whole forest of masts. I should say a whole sea of masts, but you get the drift of that. Okay, so let's move on, and we're going to visit Harwich. I don't know who this man is, but this picture from the 1800s came courtesy of the Harwich Historical Society, which is a wonderful place to do research. He is holding up what's called a Cape Cod turkey, or a codfish, that came from Nantucket Sound. Can you believe how huge this fish is? And sometimes it's just interesting to see how large a fish is. We don't often see them that large anymore. So we'll move on, and this is a scene out of Bass River. It's one of my favorite pictures. I love Bass River passionately, and these are some of the vessels. Some are day fishermen, some are pleasure craft, but Bass River, of course, was full of fishing vessels. And so now we're going to go to Osterville, and this scene is from the famous Crosby Boatyard in Osterville, and these are the brothers. I don't know exactly who is whom, but we assume that these are Charles, Horace, and Worthington, and they opened the boatyard in 1850, so I imagine this is some years beyond that. It has to be, of course. The family invented the sailboat, the catboat, which measured about 18 feet, and it had a unique centerboard design. And I'm assuming by looking at this, this has got to be the late 1800s. So maybe this is the second generation or the first generation that is aging, but it's still very interesting to look at. So now we're going to hop back to the vineyard, and this is Captain Zebulon Tilton. He lived from 1867 to 1952, and he was a sixth-generation Vinlander, and he owned a vessel called the Alice S. Wentworth, pictured to the left. She was a two-masted 40-tonner. By meaning, whenever you hear tonnage, it's how much tonnage that certain vessel can carry. And he hauled bricks and, as I note here, ice and coal. And interestingly, he was the last commercial ship under sail as a coastal schooner. He died in 52, the night of a hurricane that blasted through. He was charming, generous, humorous, and quite confident. These attributes describe him perfectly. And he, during his years aboard the Wentworth, and he was married 3 times. And he's quite a character, as I mentioned. He was cross-eyed. So this, he once said about his condition as being cross-eyed, he said, "I got the advantage. I can see both ways at once." And legend has it that on a windless day, his singing voice could be heard a half-mile away. So on the left, you will meet a very interesting man, Sumner Increase Kimball. And you see from the picture or from the words how long he lived to 1923. He organized the U.S. Life-Saving Service, and that was a forerunner to today's Coast Guard. And that actually happened on the south shore of Cape Cod, facing Nantucket Sound. So he was instrumental in helping to fund a bunch of huts that lined Nantucket Sound, which allowed distressed seamen to find safety and supplies. And the gentleman on the right, Captain Richard Tuttle of Harwichport, he died in 1899, a few days after he became ill while on duty in a storm. And the first U.S. Life-Saving Service station on Nantucket Sound, among them, was on Muskeget Island at the base of Great Point in 1883, and another in 1890 at Matticat. And then numerous others were sited, of course, as I mentioned, on the Cape's south side. And these huts were instrumental in saving the lives of so many. So now we're looking at a lightship, and this is part of the strong Coast Guard presence on Nantucket Sound. So the backstory is, in 1790, President George Washington signed legislation establishing the Marine Revenue Cutter Service, and this was done to collect taxes. Alexander Hamilton was the first Secretary of the Treasury, and this was the legacy agency of the Coast Guard. And then a lot of things happened since then, since 1790. In 1852, the Lighthouse Service evolved from the former U.S. Lighthouse establishment, as they now overseeing aids to navigation. And then in January 1915, President Woodrow Wilson signed an act into law creating the United States Coast Guard, which merged the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service with the U.S. Life-Saving Service. And in June 1932, the U.S. Steamboat Inspection Service and the Bureau of Navigation were merged under the Commerce Department. 7 years later, and this is now 1939, the U.S. Lighthouse Service merged with the Coast Guard, and so did the light ships. And so right now you're seeing the Pollock lightship here, which was stationary. They were held by the bow and port, by the bow and the front, usually on the port side, by chains grounded to the floor of the Sound. And they were sort of a living aid to navigation. Some were run over by ocean liners, and some were taken out by a storm. And it was very dangerous to be on a lightship. So in June 1932, the Steamboat Inspection Service and the Bureau of Navigation were merged, as I said, under the Commerce Department. And 7 years later, in 1939, the U.S. Lighthouse Service merged with the Coast Guard, and so did lightships. And so I think we go back to the Pollock light for a minute. So all navigation buoys, rules, regulations, and charts were merged. And today the Coast Guard is under the Department of Homeland Security. And in 1985, the Coast Guard stopped using lightships, and they thus ending 164 years of continuous service. And so this is one of my favorite vessels. This is the schooner Wyoming. And I've often wondered why did they name a ship after a state that's landlocked? I don't understand that, but someone did. And she was the largest schooner ever built with 6 masts. And she foundered east of Pollock Rip in March of 1924 with the loss of 14 crew. And then we come to, we're actually ahead of schedule. I hope no one minds this. We actually come to the advent of tourism on Nantucket Sound. And you could see here, Inglewood Hotel, which is Inglewood Beach in West Yarmouth on the Cape. And on the right is a postcard from Dennisport, Mass. And the Inglewood Hotel is no longer there. But the beaches in Dennisport are, as are the beaches in Yarmouth. And Dennis is said to have the best beaches on the Cape, but I think that's arguable depending on where you live. And we can move to the next slide. And of course, we have lighthouses aplenty. And this is Bishop and Clerk's Lighthouse off Gammon Point off Yarmouth on the Cape. And there's not much left there. It certainly does not look like that today. And on the right is the Bass River Lighthouse. And in 1938, on the right, the Bass River Lighthouse was taken over, purchased from the Coast Guard, and it's now a restaurant, and it remains one as well. And you can actually sleep there, I'm told. So haven't slept there, but the architecture is interesting. It's full Greek revival. And it's really a beautiful building. And so Nantucket Sound, we have to talk about the indigenous peoples. It's a pleasure to do so. No presentation is complete without knowing who was here for thousands of years before colonial settlement. So Martha's Vineyard was once called Capawack by the Wampanoag. And so many years ago, I spoke with Linda Coombs, a tribe member, and she said, I'll never forget her words. I actually wrote them down. She said, "We have the right to be what we were created as." And this is one of the images. If you can just picture anything south of the houses on the mainland, but this is what was seen off Nantucket Sound. And the Wampanoag tribe, which is most of the tribe people were Wampanoag around Nantucket Sound. They call themselves the people of the first light because sunrise over what is now the US was first seen over Nantucket Sound. So the first sunlight to touch what is now the United States would occur over Nantucket Sound before it swept westward. So for hundreds, if not thousands of years, their lives were uninterrupted until explorers and colonists arrived. Among the first was Bartholomew Gosnold in 1602, and he named Cape Cod after the big fish he saw. Then came Samuel D. Champlain in 1606, Adrian Block in 1614, and the Venerable John Smith years before Mayflower in 1614. And as we know, many followed. There is always the legend of the Norsemen coming through Nantucket Sound and went north up the Bass River, although that has never really truly been proven. So I'm not quite sure. I didn't want to include them too much without proof, but given that they were probably in Newfoundland and somewhere in Canada, I would not be surprised if that is indeed the truth. So, some favorite pictures. Okay, so Nantucket Sound was, is, and will be many things to many people. And so some favorite pictures that I have are, here's the first one. This is the Woods Hole fish market. And so the horse-drawn at the right would have been filled with ice, and that is what would have gone down all the main streets and to restaurants and to homes. And on the left is probably what was the fish coming from the boat to the processing facility. And this is one of my favorites. I'm 99% sure this is on Bass River, and these are school children, and these are the salt works. And the salt works were indeed just that. You see the covered vats, which were the roofs were on wheels and they were rolled over, and the sun would evaporate the seawater, leaving the salt, and the salt would take care of preserving fish and other food until the railroads came to upstate New York and the salt mines were discovered there, and the railroads extended to Cape Cod, I believe, in about 1828 in Sandwich, and by 1848 the railroad was in or a decade later, the railroad had made it to Provincetown, and Route 6 is on the spine of what was the largely the railroad. But the school children, when it rained, a bell would go off and they would run out of their schoolhouse and they would come and they would push the roofs over the vats so no more water would go in them. And you can see a beautiful windmill in the distance. Oh, and this is my absolute favorite. This is Nantucket Sound frozen over, or most of it froze over in the late 19th century. Can you believe that? And so what they did was they pushed that dory on the left on skates up to the steamer. People got off and they were transported to the mainland over ice. Now today, especially with climate change, I can't imagine Nantucket Sound freezing over, but it did. You can also look at the island home and the side paddle wheel and how absolutely beautiful that is. And so I absolutely love this picture. So where does all this research and data I've collected leave us? What do we do with it? What lessons can we learn? As a classically trained historian, I believe that if we understand yesteryear, we are better equipped for the challenges of tomorrow, both as individuals and, let's go look at that boat again. Why not? Oh, there we go. We'll leave this on for a second. Thanks, Peter. So we can look at the challenges of tomorrow. So history provides us two things always: perspective and context. So because the past provides all the building blocks for a resilient and responsible future, that is what the value of history is. And so history is not just telling really cool stories or funny stories or looking at old clothes and boats and things like that. It's a template for tomorrow. And I think Nantucket Sound is a perfect laboratory to study society and culture and maritime industries and human technologies of the past. And as an environmentalist, Nantucket Sound is a living laboratory of biodiversity, change, and challenge. And as a writer, there's always some great stories to tell. And I would like to thank all of these historical societies who over the years have been so good to me and provided so many wonderful pictures and data. I once was at the Historical Society of Old Yarmouth, where I used to be a board member like many years ago. I'm dating myself, but I'm old, but that's okay. And I opened a file and I saw an old land deed, and a Native American had made an X there. And I will leave you with one funny story, speaking of land deals. So land was sold. The indigenous peoples did not consider land to be owned by humans. They thought that it was shareable. And so maybe not enough information was given to them or understood because of language and culture and tradition, that when they sold their lands, they would not be able to access them anymore. Although landowners now are giving access to tribe members for their cultural traditions to go on their traditional ancestral lands. But anyway, so in the colonies, there was Miles Standish, who lived and died in Duxbury, but no one could buy land in the on Cape Cod in any of the lands unless the land deal went through Miles Standish. And the Native Americans grew to not like him, and they called him Captain Shrimp. And so I'll leave you with that story today. That was kind of funny. I thought it was funny. Historian humor. So if anyone has any questions for me, I would love very much to be able to answer them for you. I guess we're going to try some now, but here's my information. If you would like to email me, that would be fine. And so I'm happy to try to take some questions.
Thanks, Theresa. That was great. Learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did too. So let me just get here. Okay. You are so knowledgeable in so many areas concerning Nantucket Sound. Do you have a favorite aspect of the sound that you truly love researching and learning about?
I'd say the people. I would say specifically the sea captains, whether they were whalers or anything, because if you can imagine a young Cape Cod boy or Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard leaving home at 12 to be a cabin boy under the safety of a captain or a cook's assistant, or to shovel coal or wood or something. They left home early. They'd never been off the Cape before. And you put them on a wooden ship in the middle of, and then they're going to London, they're going to Singapore, they're picking up a cargo of sugar in Manila, and they're on a ship in a very closed society, most often safe. They were pretty good to the boys. And then you turn maybe 16, 17, now you're a sailor, you went aloft, meaning you were up above. And then by 21, many were actual captains. And in the societal structure that was Nantucket Sound, and of course, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, you were at the height of society. If you were a sea captain, only above that was a ship owner. That was it. So you put a little Cape Cod boy on a bunch of wood, a ship, and then you put them out halfway across the world. That is amazing. That's an amazing, I think it's pretty cool.
That is definitely. Robin gives a comment that says the first harbor and village shown was Nantucket Harbor, Brant Light, and Cotu are visible.
Okay.
Gerald asks, could you take a moment to speak about the history of the separation between Nantucket and Vineyard Sound?
No, I can't. I don't know too much about that. Yeah.
Well, that's an honest answer.
Okay.
A couple of comments. Danny and Tom both say no questions, but just really liked the photos. Really appreciated your historic photos. Fascinating to peek into the past.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to say was the actual, I don't know if anyone's interested, the actual research and writing process of what it takes. And I wanted to make note that there's so many historical societies on Cape Cod. There may be 15 towns, but like, for instance, the town of Falmouth has, I think 14 villages or and the town of Barnstable has 7, but there's several historical societies. So every historical society is itself a beautiful miniature museum. And they have, oh my gosh, the repository is university grade. And the Historical Society of Old Yarmouth has a vault now, a temperature controlled room where everything is beautifully accessioned and cataloged. So if anyone ever has an opportunity to see their local historical society, please do go. They have wonderful people there. And they're really fabulous. So the research opportunities are, if you peek into a file, you never know what you're going to come across. Sturgis Library has the Hooper Room has a wonderful repository. I was once in Sturgis Library researching a different book, and I came across a diary of a sailor. He was a first mate. And I to this day could kick myself for not writing down the name of the ship or who he was. I think he was a Nickerson, but everyone was a Nickerson then. But and he was on a slave ship. And he said something like, I hear their cries below, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I feel so bad, on and on and on. And I think that's maybe my next book. I'd like to think about that, think about a diary. I will find that diary again of a Cape Cod sailor and trace a voyage or something like that.
I'm
Yeah.
sure you will. A related question, when you set about writing a book about the Cape, what do you use as your best resources for information?
I like there in research, there's primary materials and secondary materials. Primary materials are letters, diaries, something that is not second generation, like where's a book? Let's
There's
see.
many behind you.
Yeah, oh yeah, there are like tons behind me, my books. This is my Nantucket Sound book, but this is, if someone were to use this for something, this is a secondary research material. Diaries are the best diaries. And, official documents, not newspapers. Newspapers are secondary sources because they, by the very nature of being a newspaper, they have to extract the data from somewhere else. But town records, vital statistics. I've got a bunch of Cape Cod books up there on the middle top shelf, if you can see, of vital statistics and things like that. So sometimes when I want to interview or not interview, research a certain person, I'll find a name that looks interesting and I'll go through a cemetery. They have tons. I mean, the headstones are like, this captain did this captain did that. And then find a name and then go to town hall, see if you can get the bookmarks, birth and death bookmarks, very important. And then see if you can find an address or a history of the house. And that's how it starts. It starts there.
Yeah, Theresa, the book that you showed on Nantucket Sound, where could people find that if they were interested?
It's on Amazon, I think.
Okay.
It's still in print. There is one error in it, which has always embarrassed me, but I'm very open about it. When I was writing it, I think I was writing it so quickly, I termed something west when it should have been east or vice versa. So, but other than that, what I like about it is there are many more maps in there that I got from the Leventhal Museum at the Leventhal map room at the Boston Public Library. I was looking at it today, this book, starting a week ago when I was putting this PowerPoint together. And I thought, oh, I forgot I wrote that, or, oh gosh, that's kind of interesting. So, but my latest book is on the common loon. It's called Symphony in the Wilderness. It's not out yet. And my co-author is a professor at Tufts University, a wildlife biologist named Dr. Mark Pokris, and it's on the common loon, Gavia immer, which has the most haunting call in the natural world. If you Google or go online and look up the call of the common loon, it's beautiful. And I have seen them in Nantucket Sound, but off season. They winter there.
Okay, well, we'll look for that when it's out.
All right.
Tom says, I love the last photo of the frozen sound. Have you ever looked into the daily temperatures of that particular year? Was it a short-term cold snap or was it a long, bitterly cold year?
I don't have the exact year. I have the decade, but not the exact year. But it's interesting that you did bring up the question about temperature. I believe Henry Bigelow from Woods Hole Oceanographic was the first scientist to actually do water quality, testing and studying of it in the 1800s, early 1900s. I'm not quite sure of the year, but I know the name Henry Bigelow, and he did some fascinating work. Good question, Tom.
Janie would like to know, what is the current shipping traffic in the Nantucket Sound area?
Oh, golly. You're asking a historian a contemporary question. I would assume it's still the old traveled route coming in.
The main channel.
Yeah, from and going through eventually into Vineyard Sound. I mean, I assume it's just the way it was. If we can go back to a map, I don't know if we want to do that, Peter, but that's a good question, Janie. They're still on the same pathway, so to speak, as they were in yesteryear.
Hey, Veronica asks, do you know what number of shipwrecks lie on the bottom of the Sound? I read that a survey has been ongoing.
Oh gosh, I think if you were to ask Victor Mastone, who's the state archaeologist, he could give you a definitive number. I know there are dozens and dozens of, and Audrey, you would know too. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's in the 100 to 200 range. And I'm not sure if it's on our website, but back in probably 2006, 2007, we actually commissioned a study to identify what shipwrecks were on the bottom of the Sound. If you email me, and I'll give my contact information at the end, I can certainly provide that study. And the gentleman that did it is named Jim Janney. And he actually did one of our A Celebration of Nantucket Sound webinars probably last year. And that's also, we record all these webinars, including this one. So if you go on our website, saveoursound.org, his presentation on shipwrecks is on there. And we had another gentleman from the Coast Guard that did another webinar on shipwrecks. So there's two of those. So if you're interested, I encourage you to either email me or just go on our website where you'll see the recording of those prior ones.
So Audra, I have a question for you. You are such an
changes
expert.
The rules.
I know, but you are such an expert on Nantucket Sound, but as you pursue your work through contemporary times, what is it about the historical part of Nantucket Sound that is so captivating to you personally?
I think the tribal history, really. Yeah. The fact that as I said, in 2010, the keeper of the National Register, which is a position within the U.S. Department of the Interior, basically determined that Nantucket Sound was what's called a traditional cultural place, making it eligible for the National Register. And that was because Nantucket Sound was dry land where the Wampanoag tribes lived, buried their ancestors. It's a sacred site. And so it has a very, very rich tribal history. So of course, you've got the rich maritime history with the shipwrecks, et cetera, the whole fishing history, which is, contemporary uses as well. But I think the whole tribal history is really fascinating. And, on that as well, we had somebody from the Wampanoag tribe, Chucky Green, that did one of our webinars as well. So if people are interested in that, I think that's really, very fascinating. And our work now to protect Nantucket Sound, part of that is to protect it as a sacred site, which is very much in line with some of the priorities of the current, federal administration.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Danny says, your books, Theresa, are available at 8 Cousins, Yellow Umbrella, Where the Sidewalk Ends, Titcomb's and Brewster bookstores on the Cape. So
okay.
somebody's closely following where your books are located.
I haven't written. My books are published by the History Press, which is the nation's largest regional press of regional histories. But they do a beautiful job, and I am working on a book on the Coast Survey, which is I have I don't know if you could see to the left of me. Those are all research books. Pulling together that history of the Coast Survey book. And I've been so passionate. Ask my kids, that's all Mom talks about sometimes, but that's what I'm working on now. But I really do like, this is another book I did. This is one of my first ones, True Accounts of Yankee Ingenuity and Grit. And what I like about it is it's on land and it's at sea. It's how the first homes were constructed. And then it's what people ate. And I love cultural history, how people lived. I mean, Audra, do you ever, if you see an old house and you can imagine it from 200 years ago, what did they have for breakfast? Or, I love domestic history, which is a newer subfield in the overall field of history.
I have to honestly say, I don't think I've ever had that thought about what they ate for breakfast, but I think now when I see an old house, I probably will.
Yeah.
Okay. Kate is asking how, with your knowledge, can you enhance our effort to save or protect Nantucket Sound?
The only thing I could say is people will fight and lay their sword down for something they care about, but they can't care about something unless they know about it. And so when you talk about Nantucket Sound, you're talking about national heritage, you're talking about national tradition, you're talking about, yes, Massachusetts history, but you're also talking about Native American history.
Absolutely.
And this is not just, any waterway anywhere is important. But if you look on a global map, Nantucket Sound in Massachusetts and Cape Cod, I mean, everyone, you just see the symbol of Cape Cod and you know where that is. It's iconic. And so, saving Nantucket Sound, and I sound like a commercial for you, right? But I honestly
That's
believe
perfect.
this.
That's what we
And
want.
when you invited me to do this webinar, I'm like, I'm so down for this. It's our responsibility to care for it, because it's like a watery museum. There are the bones of people and ships and metamorphic rocks and everything below there. And it's a graveyard. Now, my grandmother in 1956 was killed on the Andrea Doria. She was one of the 50, 40, or 49 passengers who were killed.
Wow.
So when they talk about raising the Andrea Doria, or people going down and having fun and their recreational dives on it, I'm like, that's my grandmother's grave. And she died before I was born, but
That's
I
amazing.
got to know her through family stories and stuff and pictures, of course. But that is a graveyard of people who lost their lives. And so I feel that way about Nantucket Sound. That's, people.
Absolutely. And Nantucket Sound also, in addition to being such a rich historic resource, it's also, a very rich natural resource, habitat to a number of, marine life, wildlife, et cetera. So that's one of the reasons that we started doing these monthly webinars, was really just to highlight, the economic aspects of Nantucket Sound, historic, environmental, to really enhance people's appreciation of why Nantucket Sound is so important and why it really needs to be protected in perpetuity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, let me just add this as you're going to your next question, which I hope I have the knowledge to answer. When you look at the sheet of water, you think, oh, the water's so beautiful, and which it is. But there's a water column to study. There's phytoplankton, and there's zooplankton, and there's, animal and plant entities in there. And there's different sea animals that live at different levels of the water column, and then the different zones, and it's just, it's, if you take one player out of the marine food web, if you disturb it in some way, and sharks, deserve a place because they add to the biodiversity and everything, it upsets the balance. We still have that balance largely as we did 100 years ago or 200 years ago. But I mean, certainly there are challenges. Anyway, are there more questions?
Yes, of course there are. Many keep coming.
Oh gosh.
Tom asks, what is the best way for someone to support the preservation of Nantucket Sound and its wildlife? So if you don't want to answer that one, I can.
No, I mean, let's both answer it.
You go first.
Okay, so if you're walking on the beach, Tom, and you're and you see a piece of trash, pick it up, because especially if there's a straw, it might end up in the mouth of the neck of a turtle or something like that. So be a responsible person, but then also be a member of a civil society and look around and say, what are we as a community? What are we facing? And we're facing, environmental dangers and nitrogen loading and things. So now I'm going to throw it to you, Audra, because I think you can also answer that.
Yeah, mine's maybe more tactical, but for example, on Earth Day, we hosted, along with the Black Dog, a beach cleanup at Craigville Beach, and had a number of people come to make sure that, our beaches are clean. And it was a way to commemorate Earth Day on a more, specific level, just to spread the word that Nantucket Sound is in danger. It has diminished water quality. It's facing other environmental threats. The federal waters in the center are vulnerable to industrialization. They can still be leased by the federal government that has that strange jurisdiction, and just really spread the word. I'm always happy to go to any kind of, Rotary Club or homeowners association, or any group that you might be part of, to, speak to people. And of course, because we're a nonprofit, we're always looking for donations to help fund, our important work to protect and preserve the sound. And I'll get to contact information at the end. But again, I'm happy to talk to any groups that are interested to really talk about why Nantucket Sound is vulnerable and needs protection.
Mm-hmm.
Oops, here, sorry. Oops, I'm just, okay. Peter says, I enjoyed the history of Nantucket Sound. We started, sorry, I can't even see that. So this is, we started the meeting with the preservation of Nantucket Sound. What impact would the preservation of Nantucket Sound have on the wind turbine farms? So, you know, on that topic,
I will just
ahead.
say one thing. All right, on that, because I do have a slight opinion on that. I think if you put a wind farm is the privatization of a public trust resource. You have your water, which should be Nantucket Sound should be all state water. That's how I feel personally. I don't want to be crucified for my thought, but I'm gonna. It's the privatization of a public trust resource. Would you want a private oil drilling company to go into Yellowstone? That is a public trust resource. Would you want that? No. So where are we on ocean zoning these days?
So, and that's the key point. So we've had the development of ocean-based technologies, whether it's, you know, offshore wind or whether it's hydrokinetic power, without really, or sort of tailing that is the concept of ocean zoning or marine spatial planning. So the whole idea is just as we have on land, we have areas that are designated as open space that should be protected, not developed. We have areas that are zoned as residential, areas that are zoned as commercial. It's really the same notion of looking at our oceans, particularly as technology continues to develop and there's competing uses such as, you know, fishing is a prime one that we have to protect those traditional uses and look at areas where there's fewer conflicts versus a place like Nantucket Sound, which is, while it's in the water, it's not truly offshore. You are surrounded by 3 landforms, by Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, with a lot of uses within. So it's really a matter of, you know, smart planning moving forward. And that's really what we're trying to do, is to protect Nantucket Sound in the long term as, you know, an open space that should not be developed.
Absolutely. And if you, right now, when you look at a map of the coastline, you see nothing but blue. But without proper zoning, might one day we be looking at a floating casino next to a sand gravel mining operation, next to this, next to that? What is our map going to look like without proper governance in, you know, whatever? And I'm all for wind power, just in the right space.
Okay, thank you. Veronica says, Audra, just wondered if you saw any of the ancient cedar trees that were exposed along the sound during this past winter after our storms.
Ooh.
I have not. She says, I've seen these appear and disappear a few times in my life. That is really interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. How interesting.
Okay. And somebody else says, thank you both so much. I particularly enjoyed the maps early on that show the connection of Nantucket Sound with the Nantucket Shoals area. Okay, just 1 or 2 more. I'm getting here too. This is kind of a fun place as a last question before we wrap up. It's okay. I think so. Obviously the Cape and Nantucket Sound are such big attractions for tourists. What would you say are the best places for visitors to see along Nantucket Sound?
Go up high, find a high perch, and in May, look for humpback whales, you know, go on a high hill, they're there. I just like vistas. I'm all about vistas, you know.
There's certainly a lot of beautiful ones here.
Yes, exactly.
So, okay, well, that's it for questions, Theresa. That was wonderful. I really appreciate, you know, you coming and sharing your knowledge of the history of Nantucket Sound. And I know I learned a lot, so really appreciate that and your enthusiasm and your support.
Yeah, I love history. Oh, Josh, I just love it. And thank you everyone for your time. I'm so grateful to have been here today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Audra and Peter.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sure I'll see you soon. So just before we close up, again, thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to Theresa. I hope everyone has a deeper appreciation of Nantucket Sound and, you know, another aspect of why it's so important to protect and preserve it. If you have any questions, you can go to our website, saveoursound.org, or email me directly at audra@saveoursound.org. And I encourage you to follow us on social media. Our next webinar will be in June. It is just on June 15th, again at 6 p.m. And it's going to be on boat building and design with master boat builder Nat Benjamin, who is a co-founder of Gannon Benjamin Marine Railway. So, we'll send out emails, but if you want to go to our website for more details and to register, it's at saveoursound.org/ACONS. So hope to see you at our next webinar, and thank you for your time tonight, and have a great evening. All right, bye.